Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. I'll say a few words, first of all, about my visit this week to the United States, and then I'll take some questions. Given the time difference between here and Washington, D.C., it was difficult last night to share information about my visit, so I thought it essential to be available to answer questions as soon as possible after my return. It's now less than a week to go before the President of the United States will arrive in the United Kingdom for the state visit. That means that we are right now in the critical days when decisions will be made and deals finalised in relation to the UK-US trade deal. And those decisions will affect jobs, growth and prosperity here in Scotland and across the United Kingdom. The negotiations are, of course, being conducted by the United Kingdom Government, but Scotland has significant interest, not least in the whisky industry. It became clear when President Trump visited Scotland in July that amongst the many issues being considered in the trade deal, the tariff on whisky was not on his radar. That changed during the course of that visit. Thanks to the conversations, I got the issue on the agenda and made it one of the 2 to 3 key sectors that were the focus of ongoing discussions. While it was encouraging to get it onto the agenda, we certainly did not get a deal over the line. Since then, there has been work behind the scenes undertaken by both the Scottish Government and the United Kingdom Government. And with a few days just to go before the state visit, my sense of where things stood was that there was a chance, but only a chance, that a better deal on whisky was possible. I therefore decided on Saturday to travel to Washington, D.C. myself to try to make more progress. The invitation that we then received from President Trump to meet him personally meant that we had an opportunity to make the case to the person on the American side who could, in the end, make the decision and do the deal. I did not go to negotiate. That is for the United Kingdom Government to do, and we certainly were not going armed with just special pleading and sentiment. No, we went to make the case to America that there was a deal possible that was better for Scotland and, crucially, better for the United States too, a win-win. We spent 50 minutes yesterday in the Oval Office with the President and with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. It was a good meeting, a very serious and a very substantial conversation. We set out our case, set out the chance that we believe exists for a better deal that benefits America and Scotland. And President Trump listened carefully to Scotland's case. But I want to be very clear, we did not conclude a deal. That work rests with the United Kingdom Government. I've worked hard to create a platform for the UK Government to negotiate and to deliver on Scotch whisky. A better deal for whisky was not previously on the agenda, and it now very much is. But the ball is firmly in the UK Government's court. They must press on with the detailed negotiations and try to get a deal over the line. That said, I have to be realistic about our chances of getting this deal. US policy is pro-tariffs. The President believes in tariffs. So nothing here is going to be easy. It never was. But I think and I hope there is now a real chance of a better deal. We've done the best we can to put this possibility in front of US decision makers, including the ultimate US decision maker. I think we have made progress for Scotland this week in the trip to the United States. My visit to Washington also included an excellent and informative meeting with the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, the Kentucky Distillers Association, alongside the Scotch Whisky Association. This underlined to me the common cause that the two industries face and how we can hopefully secure a win-win outcome. I also met with key members of Congress on Capitol Hill to help to promote the case for a better tariff deal for whisky. And given the opportunity to speak with the President, I thought it was important to raise the ongoing conflict in Gaza, the attack yesterday in Qatar, and the progress for peace in the Middle East, an issue which is of such huge concern to the people that I serve in Scotland. In all of my engagements yesterday with everyone I met, I was given a warm welcome, and it is clear that Scotland is close to the hearts of many of America's top lawmakers and business people. In my view, that is something that we should not only cherish, but we should also nurture. Of course, that affection for Scotland extends to the very top of the United States government, something President Trump made clear to me when I met him during the summer. He told me at that stage that if he could be of help to Scotland, I should let him know. Well, I'm glad that this week I took the opportunity to follow up on the President's offer. I'll now very happily take some questions from you all, and I'll come first of all to Colin Mackay.
After your talks yesterday, you clearly think there is a deal that could be got over the line. Do you have confidence in the UK negotiating team to get it over the line?
I think there's every possibility that a deal can be made here, because what I was setting out to President Trump and to others is a basis of a deal which benefits not just Scotland but also the United States. And it fundamentally hinges on the impact of tariffs. Tariffs are having a negative effect on Scotch whisky just now. It's costing the industry £4 million a week. If the industry is losing £4 million a week as a consequence of tariffs, it hasn't got that £4 million to invest in the future of the industry. Undoubtedly, capacity will begin to be undermined as a consequence. If that happens, then an important trade for the United States will be undermined, and that's the trade in casks that come from Kentucky, where bourbon has been produced, and those casks are then transshipped to Scotland at a price, £300 million market a year. Well, that will be undermined if the Scotch whisky industry is facing tougher times. So there's a win-win situation to be obtained here. So it's not just a one-way street for Scotland, it's got benefits for the United States too. That's why I think it's a really attractive proposition. And I think in the light of that, I think there is every possibility a deal can be made. What I've done is I've got much greater focus and priority attached to this. I don't think this was anywhere on the cards prior to President Trump's visit in the summer, but I've now got it on the agenda, and I leave it very much to the United Kingdom government, who have the constitutional responsibility to negotiate this deal. And I want to make sure every effort is put in to make sure that's the case. And I've got confidence the UK decision makers and negotiators recognise the priority that I attach to this issue. Glenn Campbell.
2 points. What has changed from the point where you questioned whether the state visit next week should go ahead in the aftermath of President Trump describing a future for Gaza as a sort of Riviera-type resort? What's changed between then and now when you're preparing to be a guest at that state dinner next week? And on whisky tariffs, if there is a deal that improves trade conditions, you'd be entitled to claim some credit for that alongside the UK government and trade bodies on either side of the Atlantic. If that deal does not emerge, are you simply going to blame the UK government?
Well, first thing on what's changed, I think we've just got to get on with the world as we see it and as it is in front of us. And I want to make sure that I can engage constructively to advance the interests of Scotland, and that's precisely what I'm doing, what I was doing at the start of this week in the United States, and what I'll do by attending the banquet as part of the state visit that His Majesty the King is hosting next week. On tariffs, look, I'm interested in making progress. I want to get things done. I'm talking to the Scotch Whisky Association, who very much welcomed the initiative that I have taken to advance this issue and to increase the priority that's involved. I want to make sure I do everything I can to support the industry, because the industry is facing a tougher climate just now. Higher employers' national insurance contributions is undermining the industry. Higher energy costs is undermining the industry, and we've now got tariffs. There's a hat-trick of problems that the industry is wrestling with. And that's going to ultimately affect jobs and employment in fragile communities in Scotland, many of those communities are very familiar to you, Glenn. So I think it's part of my duty to make sure that I make as much progress, and I've provided a pathway through which the UK government can travel to find a solution that will benefit the Scotch whisky industry. It will also, as it happens, benefit interest in the United States as well, because it creates more of a market opportunity for them. And that's in everyone's interest, because that supports growth, it supports expansion. And I've done some pretty heavy lifting to get us to this point, and I want those responsible for concluding this deal to do it, and to conclude it positively in Scotland's behalf.
But will it be the UK government's fault if they don't get it?
Well, we've got it to a good position, and I just simply hope that the necessary impetus can be given to it by the UK government to get it over the line. Kieran.
Thanks, First Minister. You talked about the impact on the whisky industry. John Fordyce, the Director of Borders Distillery, said that tariffs set back their plans to expand into the US by 6 months. He says only a zero tariff solution will mean they can expand their business. Having spoken to President Trump, how confident are you there's a zero tariff solution on the table here at all?
There is a possibility of it, Kieran, because I think the option that I've put on the table brings economic benefits to the United States as well. So essentially, and what Mr Fordyce has put to you is absolutely correct, and I'm hearing that from various interested parties across the Scotch whisky industry. And this is, as I said in one of my previous answers, the tariffs are costing the industry £4 million a week, so undoubtedly it will set back investment plans. And interestingly, I was talking yesterday with a representative of the company that is responsible for transporting the barrels from Kentucky to Scotland, and they're already seeing orders being cancelled by Scottish distilleries because they just do exactly what you're talking about in the Borders distillery, where distilleries can't be confident of their production, so they're not ordering the casks, so that has a negative effect on economic activity in the United States. And that point I made strongly to President Trump, who obviously is very interested in jobs and growth in America. That's the heart of the tariff agenda. So what this approach helps to do is that it actually addresses the agenda that President Trump is concerned about, which is jobs and growth in America. I think so there's an opportunity there. I've mapped it out. It's been set out to the the highest voices in the United States, and I just hope that we can get that over the line, and I think there's every possibility we can, because it will also have great benefits for distilleries in Scotland, many of whom will be able to seize that opportunity and to grow and to expand. Gina.
Thanks, First Minister. Can I ask what your understanding is of why whisky wasn't on the President's agenda, in terms of these negotiations the UK government has been doing? And also, you said it was a very constructive meeting. Can you tell us exactly what the President said to you that makes you come away thinking that and that a deal is possible? What were his words to you on that?
Okay. On the issue of priority, I don't think whisky was high enough up the discussion, to be honest, Gina. That's what it looks like to me. I think there was other issues that were the fulcrum of discussion between the UK and the US, and whisky wasn't one of them. So my task over the summer was to get whisky onto the radar, and I succeeded in doing that with the visit of President Trump, and I've obviously been nurturing those discussions over the course of the intervening period. The government's been very active in trying to encourage more and more attention on this within the UK negotiators, and I think we've got to a position, obviously, as a result of the visit that I've just paid, where we've got that into a much stronger position. In terms of what President Trump said, obviously you'll understand that I'm not. It's not really appropriate for me to give a verbatim account of the conversation that we had. But if I can say to you that I was supposed to be in the Oval Office for 30 minutes, I was in for 50. That perhaps gives you an illustration that we were having a very engaged, substantive discussion about this. And he was asking me lots of questions about the proposition. He was very familiar with the issue I was raising about the impact on jobs in the United States. He was very interested in that particular point. And he obviously comes to this discussion with a deep affection for Scotland. I was explaining to him the challenges that the Isle of Harris distillery has faced, for example, where there's been employment loss there. A really dynamic distillery, marvellous product, great development, the largest employer now in the Isle of Harris, but losing jobs because of the difficult market conditions. So when I met President Trump in the summer, he asked me many questions about the Western Isles. He was fascinated about what was going on in the Western Isles these days. And one of the examples I cited to him was Isle of Harris Distillery as an example of good development, good economic opportunity, providing new possibilities for young people in the island. He was really interested in that. But the consequence of tariffs is that opportunity will be more difficult. And I think President Trump took that argument very seriously. Okay, Alan.
Yeah, thanks, First Minister. On a completely unrelated topic, you'll be aware of the preliminary hearing of the LGML inquiry got underway earlier, and a group of former patients have handed a letter into your office today calling for you to lift the time bar when it comes to compensation, because they're saying they're facing serious financial harm, and all the support or advice they've had from the Scottish Government so far has been to signpost them to food banks or to charity grants. So what would you be saying to those LGML victims today, and are you considering offering any sort of financial assistance to those former patients?
First of all, let me say that those who have suffered as a consequence of the activities of Mr El-Jamel are very much in my thoughts and my reflections. I have a number of constituents who have been affected negatively by Mr El-Jamel's surgery, so I'm acutely aware of the suffering of individuals. I'll look with care at the letter that's been submitted. The Government, of course, has a number of approaches in place to provide financial compensation for individuals in certain circumstances. We've obviously passed the limitations legislation, which relates to many of these questions. But I'll obviously consider in detail the letter that's come into me and identify if there's more action the Government can take. Neil Pooran. Neil.
Thanks, First Minister. How important was the US Ambassador Peter Mandelson to the talks you had with the President, and what you're trying to achieve more generally in terms of a trade deal? And do you feel the UK Government is fully supportive of the approach you're taking on this?
Well, the UK Government has been helpful to me in the arrangements that were put in place in relation to the visit, and we've obviously had a number of discussions with the UK Government around about the whole question of whisky tariffs, and I have been able to benefit from an extensive briefing from the Embassy in Washington, from a range of different individuals within the Embassy, the Ambassador himself, the Deputy Ambassador, the Minister Councillor for Trade and Global Issues, the Head of Political Arrangements, the Senior Trade Policy Advisor, and the Director of the Department of Business and Trade on US trade strategy and negotiations. So all that expertise has been available to support me in what I've taken forward with the President. So I've had the opportunity to have that assistance from the UK Government, which has been constructively deployed by me to find a solution on behalf of the Scotch whisky industry. So I welcome that cooperation. Chris McCall. Chris.
Thanks, First Minister. Just on the subject of tariffs, if for whatever reason we don't get a deal announced next week on a reduction, are you prepared to return to Washington as often as it takes to press the case until a reduction is agreed? And I wonder if, just briefly, if you could also comment on the news that the Hotel Claddagh in Falkirk had a brick put through its window this morning, obviously a hotel that's been at the centre of protest regarding the temporary accommodation of asylum seekers.
On the first point, Chris, I do hope that we have an announcement made that is constructive in association with the state visit. That's why I decided I thought the moment was right. These discussions will be coming to a conclusion in the next few days, so I thought the start of this week was the perfect opportunity for me to go and to try to push that along a bit. And I think in that respect, I feel very pleased that we've had that opportunity to do so and to be welcomed so well to enable that conversation to be had. If we don't get an outcome that's satisfactory next week, I won't be giving up on this, because I think for all the issues that I set out in response to Kieran's question, there will be damage done to the Scottish economy by the tariffs. It's happening already, and that damage will be done in many fragile rural communities. And as First Minister, I've got to make sure I do everything I can to avoid that. So I'll come back to it. Whether I can say I'll go to Washington as many times as required, I suspect some of you might criticise me for that if I did that. But notwithstanding the fact that it needs input, I certainly won't be giving up on the topic next week if we don't get an outcome. But I do hope that we do get an outcome. Now, on your point about the hotel in Falkirk, I absolutely deprecate the throwing of a brick at the window of the hotel. I think it's absolutely despicable that that should have happened. There'll be people inside that hotel who have experienced fear and terror, and I'm appalled that they're experiencing fear and terror in Scotland, our country. It appalls me. Having seen some of these displays of protest. I've seen some terrible language used on banners, which I'm not going to repeat at this podium. Absolutely appalling language about people, fellow human beings. And that is designed to create some fear and alarm, so I deprecate all of it. I'm appalled by it. And once we conclude this, I'm going to Parliament to sit through the debate on asylum hotels that's been brought forward by the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party that set up all of this system. We're now going to have a debate in the Scottish Parliament, which is one of the most despicable and opportunistic moments I've ever witnessed in my 26 years in the Scottish Parliament. And the Conservative Party is doing it. There'll be members of that Conservative Party who are appalled at what their front bench is doing today. But I'm going there to witness it, because it's not going to be done in my name. I can tell you that for one thing. Right, Libby Brooks.
Thanks, First Minister. Going back to Gina's point about why whisky wasn't on the President's radar when you spoke to him earlier in the summer, do you consider that sort of a responsibility and therefore a failure on the part of the UK government and negotiators for that? And following the conversations that you've now had, what advice would you have for the UK negotiators?
I think on the first point, Libby, I just think whisky wasn't getting the priority that it needs. So I think that's all I need to say about it. But I sorted that out over the summer, and it's now got the attention that it needs, and it's in active scope and consideration. In relation to what has to happen next, well, there's obviously, I want to make sure in negotiation there's got to be give and take. So there will have to be some degree of compromise on these questions. I think there's a really good opportunity for whisky essentially to be put into almost a separate category, 0 for 0, sort of out with tariffs, because it's got the approach I'm suggesting has a benefit for the United States as well as for Scotland. But that depends on the handling and the steps taken by the UK negotiators, but I think they're very much aware of the possibilities that have been raised by the intervention that I've made. Simon.
Thank you. A couple of questions. Following your meeting with President Trump in April, you said that he had demonstrated a willingness to make an exception for whisky from the tariffs. But then when he was on a flight on Air Force One back to the US, he was asked about this, he said, we really didn't discuss it much. Are you concerned that there may be a gap between what he's telling you and sort of glad handling and that sort of thing, saying what you want to hear and what he actually may end up doing? And just going back to Peter Mandelson, obviously you've read and seen the allegations against him and with regards Epstein, and you'll have seen his work up close as US ambassador as well. Do you think he's a suitable person to continue being US ambassador for the UK?
On the sequence of events, my meeting with President Trump was in July and
yes.
Not April.
Sorry, July. He flew off.
He flew off. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think the thing. What I would say, obviously, President Trump's got a lot of things on his mind. Lots and lots of things. I was quite expecting yesterday that his office might have said to me the meeting can't take place because of international events, and I would have completely understood that because big events were taking place yesterday. But instead of that, I got 50 minutes, not 30 minutes. So I think that probably indicates that President Trump was pretty engaged on the issue that I was raising with him. So I don't really have much concern that...
So you're not being played by President Trump now?
I don't think so, no, because we had a very substantive discussion about all these questions. And then on the issue of His Majesty's ambassador to the United States, the choice of ambassadors is for the Prime Minister to take and to defend, and it's up to the Prime Minister to address these issues.
Are you doing the job as far as you're concerned?
Well, I had no issues with the engagement with the United Kingdom Embassy and the support that they gave me in the last couple of days. Mark.
Thanks, First Minister. Just on Lord Mandelson, you said that it's for the Prime Minister to choose, but you're not backward in coming forward with recommendations if you think they're merited. So does Lord Mandelson, do you have confidence in Lord Mandelson to represent Scotland's interests in the US while he's got this association hanging over him. Was there any consideration of cancelling the meeting when you woke up that morning in the ambassador's residence and saw your host and the person you were going to meet both in this book?
Well, I've just got to get on with the world as it lies in front of me, and part of that is involved with, well, and that my absolute focus for the last few days has been about delivering for Scotland on whisky, and that is what took me to the United States, and I was determined to be focused on that outcome. So no other consideration really has come into my mind. I wanted to get an outcome for Scotland, and that's what I've concentrated on doing. And then in terms of issues about appointments to be ambassadors, as I said in my earlier answer to Simon, that's a matter for the Prime Minister. Dan.
Hi, thanks, First Minister. Can I just ask how you would characterise your developing relationship with President Trump? Do you like him as a person, political differences aside? And also, you mentioned Gaza came up. Did you specifically express your view that Israel may be guilty of committing a genocide? Thank you.
Well, obviously, I raised with President Trump, as I did in August, my deep July, I should say, my deep concerns about the situation in Gaza and the suffering that is underway, and I made it clear. I appealed to President Trump to use his influence to try to bring the horror to an end. So that's the appeal that I made to him. And in relation to the nature of my relationship with President Trump, I want to make sure that I do all that I can to constructively advance the interests of Scotland. That's what my duty is as First Minister. And President Trump has made clear, and he made clear to me in the summer, that he wanted to help Scotland if he could. So this is a moment where I think Scotland could do with some help, because one of our key industries is facing hardship, and I decided to take that opportunity to advance that argument and that possibility, and I'm glad I've done so.
Do you actually like him as a person?
Well, we have a perfectly courteous relationship with each other, and that relationship, I think, is one that I enjoy with lots and lots of people. Obviously, President Trump and I do not agree on everything. Quite clearly, we don't. But we've both got jobs to do, and I've got a job to do delivering for Scotland, which is what I'm doing. Michael.
Just to clarify on that last question, so did you make the comment to President Trump that you did in the Scottish Parliament last week, which is that you said that this might be a genocide? And are you concerned that there is now such a backlash from the Jewish community in Scotland at some of your comments? Some members of that community say that they don't feel safe to say that they're proud to be Jewish, and that your comments have added fuel to hatred that already exists. Are you concerned by that?
I think I've made really quite clear to everybody my views on the situation in Gaza, and I've also engaged with the Jewish community to try to address their concerns. I knew that the Jewish community would not be comfortable with what I said to the Scottish Parliament last week, but I had to do that because of the way I see the issue, the way I see the suffering that is underway. I had to make these comments clear to the Scottish Parliament, and it's important that I did so. Now, alongside that, I also made clear how much I value the Jewish community in Scotland, how I view that community to be an integral part of life in Scotland, and how we've got to nurture and support community cohesion within Scotland. It's one of the reasons why I don't approve of the debate we're about to have in the Scottish Parliament this afternoon, because I think that is designed to foment division within our communities. And I want to do all that I can to bring our communities together, to overcome any divides within our society, but there is appalling suffering underway beyond justification in Gaza, and that has to be called out. Now, I've made my position clear about genocide and my view that there is a genocide being undertaken within Gaza, and that view is very clearly and very, very openly known around the country. Cathy.
Thank you, First Minister. Thank you, First Minister. Back in July, you told the Heralds on Spun Live at the Fringe that the UK government wasn't making enough of a fuss about the tariffs on Scotch whisky. And why do you think that the UK government, as you said, wasn't making enough of a fuss back then? And are you confident, following your intervention now in Washington, that next week the UK government, Keir Starmer, will make more of a fuss with President Trump about the Scotch whisky tariffs? And also, previously the UK government have not exactly welcomed the Scottish government having an international role. Is that now position now shifting? They are more positive about you and maybe your ministers having an international role?
On the question of priority, Kathleen, I simply don't think in the issues that were being pressed for further development. The deal that was announced earlier on in the year was at a very headline level, and then there was detail to be filled in underneath that. I don't think whisky was registering very much in that discussion. I don't think it was being...
Can you say why that was?
I just don't think it was being given much of a priority by the UK government, I'm afraid to say. I think they had other priorities. I think legitimate issues, and there's a limit to the number of issues that you can advance in a negotiation. So my job was to make sure that whisky wasn't forgotten about, and I think I've got that on the radar now, and I've used every intervention I possibly can do, constructively, to try to make sure that's the case. And I'm going to make no apology for that at all. My job is to protect and promote the interests of the people of Scotland. So whisky matters to jobs and livelihoods and investment in our country. And I think there's an opportunity to enhance that. So I just had to get that up the priority list. And I think I've succeeded in doing that. Will it lead to a deal? Well, that's when you come into the inner sanctum of the negotiations, and I'm not in the inner sanctum, I'm afraid. I'd love to be, because I want Scotland to be an independent country, able to take these negotiations forward, but I'm not in the inner sanctum of those discussions. But I hope I've got whisky into the inner sanctum as much as I possibly can do. And I want to make sure that every intervention that I make is a constructive intervention to try to bring that about. And now, in relation to the international perspective, I suppose it depends the way you look at these things. I think what I was doing was protecting and promoting the interests of Scotland, which is what is in my DNA as First Minister of Scotland. Now I'll do that whether that's in Edinburgh, or if it's in Washington, DC, or if it's anywhere else that I happen to feel I've got to make that intervention, I'll make that, because it's about making sure Scotland's interests are advanced. And I think the UK government certainly didn't strike me as being in any way perturbed by what I was doing. Whether it represents a sea change in opinion, the UK government, well, I'm sure you have their telephone number, you can ask them what they think, or their email address, but for my part, I'm just doing my job. Alistair. Alistair.
Hi, thanks very much. Just on your meeting with President Trump, did he give any indication that a deal was possible or there to be done, or does your optimism simply stem from the fact that he showed interest in the issue and that he kind of asked questions about it? And just on Peter Mandelson, putting aside the appropriateness of his position, were you concerned by that letter from Lord Mandelson in which he called Jeffrey Epstein his best pal? And did the Epstein issue come up at all when you were staying with him?
On the question of the perspective of President Trump, I think, President Trump could see what I was getting at. He could see what the proposal that I was putting forward. I wasn't just setting out something which meant that America had to make a sacrifice on Scotland's behalf. I was setting out a proposition to essentially take the whisky and the bourbon issue out of the equation and to try to get a win-win for both industries. And interestingly, the congressman that I met last night, and actually the Distilled Spirits Council and the Kentucky Distillers Association that I met, they're absolutely at one with the Scotch Whisky Association, because it's in their interests as well. Now, so just now, the bourbon industry can sell bourbon into the UK without any tariffs. So it's zero coming in, but it's 10% going out. But the point I was making was there's a growth and economic opportunity argument that the more whisky is produced in Scotland, bluntly, the more barrels we'll require, which is a very lucrative trade for the United States. So I was trying to essentially get this, and I could see that President Trump could see, the dynamics of that and the benefit for jobs and investment in the United States. And, he makes no secret of the fact that he likes deals. Well, I wasn't going there with a kind of sob story. I was going there offering a deal, saying this is in everyone's interests. And so I think he got it, to be blunt. Now, obviously there's complications because, as I said in my introductory remarks, the United States policy is a tariffs policy. That's the policy position. So I need to sort of get this issue viewed in a sort of separate compartment, and we'll try and get it there. And in relation to Peter Mandelson, I think what I've said so far covers all the ground on the issues in relation to the Ambassador to the United States. Lastly, Simeon.
Thanks, First Minister. Did the issue of returning the Open Golf Tournament to Trump Turnberry come up during your meeting? If so, could you elaborate on that? If not, maybe could you talk about any other practical measures the Scottish Government could offer the US that might help the UK get a tariff deal over the line for Scotch whisky?
I think, well, what I would say is, I'm not going to go through the specifics of points of conversation, but what I would say is that, I made clear to President Trump, as I did when he came here in the summer, that we welcome the attraction of major golf tournaments to Scotland. And, there's a lot of criticism of me about the sponsorship of the Nexo Golf Championship at Balmedy, and I'm absolutely totally at ease with that. I think that's the right thing to do, to invest to attract these major tournaments, because they bring huge economic benefit to Scotland. In relation to the choreography of tariff deals, obviously there'll be a number of elements of the discussion with which I'm not familiar. I'm not privy to the contents of all of the discussions between the UK and the US governments about the components of deals. But there's obviously, as I said in my answer, I think to Libby earlier on, there's going to have to be compromises. Any negotiation requires that. The point I'm making about the whisky proposition is that I don't actually think there's an awful lot of give required on the part of the United States, because there's a big economic upside. The more Scotch whisky is buoyant, the better that is for the cask trade from Kentucky. And the more I can get thinking onto that as a series of mutually beneficial economic opportunities on this side of the pond and that side of the pond, the better in bringing us together into points of agreement about this.
He's also very transactional president, isn't he? And surely, offering something that would be personally beneficial for him would be.
I suppose I was doing that, Simeon, in the sense that I was saying, if you take the tariffs off, there's likely to be more activity in the whisky trade in Scotland, which will require more call on the product from the United States, which will benefit jobs and investment in the United States. And I come back to one of the examples I cited earlier on. It was a representative that I met yesterday morning of the company that's principally involved in supplying casks to the Scotch whisky trade, and they are having orders cancelled. It's happening now, as we speak. So that company is losing orders, and they understand why. It's because of the tariffs, and they can see the effect. They're having to lay off staff in the United States because of the impact of the tariffs. And I'm worried on this side of the pond that people are being laid off in the whisky industry just now because of tariffs, because the industry that extra cost is undermining the industry. So if we take away that extra cost, then we create the opportunity for more production in Scotland, more market opportunity, and that therefore creates more market opportunity in the United States. Now that is a transactional deal if ever I heard one, Simeon. Now it involves a bit of give and take, but fundamentally it works for Scotland and it works for the United States, and that's why I hope it results in some success. But I have to say, and a lot of the thinking around about this has come together because of a fabulous collaboration between the Scotch Whisky Association, the I'm going to get their Sunday names correct so that I don't get this wrong. If you forgive me, the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States and the Kentucky Distillers Association. The collaboration between those three organisations, the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, the Kentucky Distillers Association and the Scotch Whisky Association, has been absolutely superb in bringing together a meeting of minds about this economic opportunity. And I look forward, I'll be hosting the board of the Scotch Whisky Association in Bute House on Friday morning. They're coming to Edinburgh, I'll be hosting them in Bute House, and I look forward very much to discussing this issue and others with them, because the industry matters to Scotland and our economic well-being. Okay, right, that's all. Thank you very much. Thank you.